if there were 3 things that the writers and producers of Cobra Kai could teach to the writers and producers of The Acolyte, what would they be? Well, let's step into the dojo and find out.
I had a hard enough time beating him when he was on the good side of the Force. Now that he's gone all Sith, I feel like a helpless Jedi youngling about to get slaughtered.
Number 1, sweep the leg. Well, actually, just sweep the audience off into the adventure. Although, when it comes to Cobra Kai, I'm sure there's going to be some leg sweeping going on. So, what is it that Cobra Kai does so well that brings the story to life and makes the viewer kind of forget where they are? Well, it's that they bring the characters to life. So that's number 1. It's just bringing the characters to life. But how do they do that? Because they mix amazingly choreographed action sequences, moments of comedy, long character arcs and twists and turns in the plot. All of that seems to get mixed in, while at the same time having these moments where 2 of the characters will just sit in a room and just start talking about something, and it feels like you're maybe right there, and the guard comes down and it's almost like you're a fly on the wall. That's what they do so well, is they give moments. In all of that, they still give moments for the characters and that character development. Call it depth of character. So when you look at The Acolyte, that's something that they could have applied, is this depth of character, because if you look at the Star Wars universe, there are very intensively crafted action sequences. There are moments of comedy. That's one of the things that I feel is actually kind of a very important little ingredient that happens in Star Wars, whether it's just that there's always some kind of droid included, just when you're getting going, and little droid kind of wheels their way in or starts hopping around. So it's part of that Star Wars universe. Then you've got the long character routes that are being explored. You got all that stuff. So it's right there in Star Wars. And it's like, okay, well, these are things that are universal, and to be able to really bring characters to life, that's really what's important. So that's number 1. And even if a lot of money is put into a certain show, if there isn't that real attention to detail with the characters, then everything can be in place, but it's almost like you've got the hardware of the iPhone, but something's not quite right with the OS. The settings can be great, the color correction, the cinematography, just everything can be so off the charts sometimes with everything that's put toward making these things come to life. And they do an amazing job on these kinds of projects. There are so many talented people. I want to give credit. There really are talented people, but what is it that kind of makes it all come together sometimes? And a big part of it is, it's like that OS. So character development is kind of like an OS. And once you get that OS going, then you are not only able to navigate everything that you want within that universe, but the characters themselves are keeping you coming back. And when we really think about Star Wars, that's what happens is, why do we keep coming back a lot of times? We love the characters. That's such a big part of it. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that you've really got to understand, as a writer, you've got to understand the world or universe that you're in.
Okay, well, you're taller. You have the high ground. That's how Obi-Wan beat Anakin, right?
Star Wars and Cobra Kai are both very established. Star Wars is an established universe. Cobra Kai is an established world, and they're both very intricate. There's a lot going on. So when it comes down to it, Cobra Kai, they're keeping track of a lot of characters. In fact, they're keeping track of a lot of characters, a lot of history, a lot of fighting styles. There's all these kinds of things they're keeping track of. And then when it comes to Star Wars, well, yeah, you could argue the same kind of thing. Keeping track of different practitioners of the Force, whether it's Jedi or Sith. And there's just a lot to the world. In the case of Star Wars, it's a universe. And that's why it's so important to take that lesson from Cobra Kai that they do so well, is they treat it like that, like the entire universe is. The writers, the creators, they love the universe of Cobra Kai. And it's really the Karate Kid universe, right? Fantasy has an inherent challenge that's different than fiction because it's so imaginative that if you're not really keeping track of the lore and all that kind of stuff, and you're not really thinking about what makes it marvelous, sometimes I feel like people want to inject new things, and that's not bad. It's just keeping track of what makes it marvelous is so much of a part of why it all works. Because if fantasy was a free-for-all, it really, in most of the time, it's not going to work. Fantasy is not a free-for-all. So that's number 2. That you've got to be kind of grounded in the story, the fabric of the story, which is the world or the universe. And if you do that, then this is the clincher. You can take risks. You can really push the envelope. When Star Wars first came out, it pushed the envelope. So the thing is, and why Cobra Kai is such a great example, Cobra Kai is able to connect the dots and bring things home to that universe, and it can feel so satisfying. And I'll call it a universe because they just do such a great job. But it can bring it back, and the thing is, though, they're not doing it in a safe way. And that, to me, is the amazing thing that you can kind of get out of number 2, is that it's not safe. It's definitely adventurous. And so when you go over to The Acolyte, which is set in an adventurous universe, the audience is not going to necessarily push away what's different. They're going to be open to things that kind of push the boundaries, but that has to really also be connected to the universe itself in ways that are deep and thoughtful. And I think that's something that people might forget about fantasy sometimes, like if you're not a total fantasy fan or something, and you don't think about Star Wars, and when you maybe you like it, and when you watch it, there's a green guy named Yoda, and it's fun. There's something fun about it, right? It's fantastical. Yet at the same time, what we can miss is that there isn't a free-for-all going on. It's really very thoughtful. And so that concludes number 2. But number 3, what's so cool is with number 3, and it's really kind of a continuation of number 2 in a way, it's that what's so important to create are the thrills and chills. So with Cobra Kai, it really creates thrills. It really brings it home, like I was talking about. And you get those satisfying types of moments, but then you also get where, it's up and there's something exciting and you can't wait for the tournament to happen. And it's all on the line, right? So it really brings you into it. And there's these thrills, there's these kind of moments that are really funny that you don't expect somebody to say what just got said, and it's like, okay, that was, really politically incorrect. What? The way they all put that together and the way they kind of were able to bring things from the 80s and kind of transplant it into today, it's something where we can look at it now and we can kind of laugh at how things were, and it gives us this, it's actually insightful at the same time as being funny, and sometimes it's also just a bit of a shock. There's a shock value. So all those kind of things, right? So if you bring it back over to Star Wars, well, what is it in Star Wars? Well, there are those thrilling moments. I'm calling it fantasy, but it's also sci-fi too, right? It's just that it's this great blend. And so it blows our minds. We kind of realize, think of the universe in a different way. It has philosophical connotations and all these kinds of things. So it's those funny moments that kind of pull you in. It's that being able to relate to the character, and then just a few steps later you're kind of spiraling into, another scene, or there's a cool fight scene. That's what happens in Cobra Kai. You relate to the characters, and then suddenly you're spiraling off, and there's roundhouse kicks going on. So I think that if the Acolyte and shows like that can take a leaf out of the book of Cobra Kai, well, hey, it might just revitalize and remind the people who are putting it all together what these little key pieces are that really make it all happen. Because number 4, that little hidden tip I was telling you guys about, is really the great combination of all 3 of those things done together. When that's done together, it creates number 4, which is less is more. If you do the first 3 really well and you find a pace and make that happen, which is a lot of work, but when things are simplified to get those elements happening correctly, other things are kind of pushed aside so that the key things can come together. Well, then that's when the 4th dimension can come into play. That other part that is the little twist, the little tweak, the little thing you didn't expect, the little phrase, the way that they said something that just opens up a whole philosophical discussion when it comes to Star Wars. And it's those things all conspiring together that kind of unlocks that 4th one, that less is more. Because once you get it working with less, you don't have to have a bunch of extra fighting sometimes just to make up for the fact that the audience might be getting bored. You don't have to kind of change the dynamic between the characters just to shock people, to keep them going so that they are kind of wondering what's going to happen next. There's more to it, and that, I think, is what Cobra Kai gets so well, is they kind of pull at the strings, the emotional strings. They understand these things where you've got to sometimes change the expectation. There's, these devices they use with writing that are some of the tried and true devices, but at the same time, they're deeper than just those things. The story, and that's really what it's all about. The story is deeper than that. Storytelling. It's deeper than just the devices that it employs. And even though there may be certain things in storytelling that are really strong, that people are trained, you've got to make sure that people, that something happens and there's some emotional change here, and there's certain things that we learn, but when it comes down to it, the story contains all those things. And those may be the main features of that story. But it's when it all comes together that the 3 dimensions becomes the 4 dimensions. It's when it all comes together that not just the dimension of the story, but the dimension of the viewer comes in to play. So let us know what you think in the comments below. Those are the 4 things that the writers and producers of Cobra Kai can send out into the Star Wars universe. Let's only hope there's a Jedi there to receive it.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.